From Trauma to Belonging and Wellbeing, Strategies for Adoptive and Foster Families. My name is Chantal. I'm part of the Adopt for Life team, and I'm really pleased to be here tonight with Denise Bren. I will be facilitator for tonight's webinar, so I'm here to monitor the chat. I'm here if there's any technical difficulties, which I don't foresee, but you never know. So if there's something with the sound or something that you need that you didn't hear quite right, then just pop it in the chat and I'll make sure to fix that as soon as I can. We will be taking a bit of time at the end of the presentation for some Q&A. So along the way, if you have a question, just put it in the chat so that you don't maybe forget. And like I said, we'll take time to address any questions or comments or feedback at the end of the presentation. Before we get into that, I just want to do a quick reminder that since we are live streaming on Adopt for Life's public Facebook page, whatever you do put in the comments is going to be available to the public. So you do want to be mindful that if you are asking a question about your child or your children, that you're not putting in any identifiable information. So with that, I would like to begin by acknowledging the Indigenous peoples of all the lands that we are on. While we meet today on a virtual platform, I'd like to take a moment to acknowledge the importance of the lands which we all call home. For myself, I reside on unceded Algonquin Anishinaabe territory. And this is one way to reaffirm commitment and responsibility in improving relationships between nations, and just as a first step towards improving understanding of local Indigenous peoples and their cultures. So if you'd like, you can join me in a moment of reflection to acknowledge the harms and mistakes of the past, and to consider how we are and can each in our own way action forward in a spirit of reconciliation and collaboration. So thank you. I'd like to welcome our guest and presenter tonight, Michelle Brend, who is professor at the University of Laval, where she conducts research focused on social support, the potentially harmful impacts of the child welfare work, and implementing through social innovation. She is passionate about examining the potential impacts and moderators of traumatic experiences on helping relationships, individuals, and communities, and has practiced as a psychotherapist and social worker and clinical supervisor for, I think, over a decade. I don't know if I got all that right, Michelle, so.
Sounds good.
When I pass it over, you can make any corrections. So welcome. Thank you so much for taking time to do this presentation. We talked about how I think your colleague, Dr. Colin Vézina, presented this information in French over a year ago to a wide community that was very appreciative of it. So we thought it just made sense to have this translated in English to offer to those in the community that didn't speak French. So thank you for putting in the time to do that and to be here tonight with us. So I'm going to just stop talking now and pass it over to you.
Thank you so much, Chantal. It's really a great pleasure to be here. And I'd like to thank everyone for taking the time out of your busy days as parents to come and sit in a webinar. It's a feat in itself when we can manage to do this. So I'm going to talk about going from trauma to belonging and well-being, strategies for adoptive and foster families today. And as Chantal mentioned, I've been working with Delphine Colin Vézina at McGill for a number of years now, implementing trauma-informed care for services with children between the ages of 6 and 17, 18. So I'm really excited to talk about this content. I'm very passionate about it. And I think if you're unfamiliar with it, you'll find out during the presentation why. So I wanted to acknowledge Delphine and the work that she's been doing. If you're interested, you can go to the Canadian Consortium on Child and Youth Trauma to take a look at some of what we're up to. So let's get to it. The first thing I wanted to do was take a moment to reflect on love and how each of you is here today, driven by the passion and the love that you have for the children that you care for and care about, and how that love is a key and core ingredient to being effective parents. But sadly, it doesn't give us all of the tools and tricks to how to do it. So I'm really hoping today, especially if you are parenting children who have had experiences of trauma in their lives, to help understand that a bit more and have some other types of tools to use as you love them. So the first concept that we like to put forward is this idea of the backpack that the child carries. What do adopted and fostered children carry in their backpacks? What types of experiences have they had? And obviously they've had wonderful experiences and loving experiences. However, by the nature of the ruptures that have happened in their families, or perhaps the reasons why those ruptures occurred, they may also have had some traumatic experiences. So we can call this complex trauma or developmental trauma. And this whole notion of trauma can be very overwhelming and confusing. There's a lot of different terms and a lot of different ways to understand it. So I'm going to just choose to look at it from this perspective today so that we can have a shared language. Complex trauma results from exposure to severe stressors that are repetitive or prolonged, that involve harm, and that occur at developmentally important times in life, such as early childhood or adolescence. Now, when we talk about the harm, this can be abuse, or it can be lack of care or lack of protection. It's about not receiving what you needed at times of development. So we're not really worried about who's responsible. We're just worried about, did this little person receive what they needed in each moment of their development? And the trick with complex trauma is that it all often involves caregivers or other adults that were meant to be responsible. So there's an aspect of not receiving what you need, but also from people that you needed to receive it from. And so complex trauma is different from trauma that we might experience as adults, because once we are adults, we have all of those developmental milestones passed, whether we had all our needs met or not, we've passed those. But when it occurs during those developmental milestones, it can interrupt development, which can lead to some other types of challenges moving forward. And so when we think about those challenges, we can see through research looking at children and youth and adults who've experienced complex trauma that the impacts cluster around specific parts of the self. So one is the attachment relationship, which I'm sure the attachment system that you've heard of before. And so that's whether or not you have an ability to have a secure attachment, or if you might have an insecure attachment. Now, attachment, or the relationship between babies, children, and youth to caregivers, it's what forms our relational scaffolding, the foundation of our capacity to understand the world around us. So it's a pretty big deal. The other thing that happens is biology can be impacted. So as you recall from this definition, these are severe stressors. So if you have severe stressors, your body reacts to stress. All of us have that experience. Our heart rate gets more rapid, our nervous system gets more sensitive. A number of cascades occur through our body when we have stress hormones. Stomach stops digesting. Many things happen. When you have experienced complex trauma as a child, that biological chain of events gets triggered often either very easily or it gets blunted. So there's a biological reality that occurs that also can impact brain development and general nervous system functioning throughout the lifespan. Emotion regulation is another one. The capacity to bring oneself back to a calmed emotional state. Dissociation, that is when we are extremely stressed and we kind of go into a dream world or go into a numbness. Everyone has experienced dissociation. If you've ever daydreamed, that's a dissociative process. if you've ever blanked out in the middle of doing something. I dissociate every day when I leave my house and I forget that I locked my door, even though I watched myself do it. That's a dissociative process. Our brain can shut down things that it doesn't need to remember to leave space for other things, or that could be harmful if remembered. And so dissociative processes for people who've experienced trauma can be voluntary or involuntary. And it means a cutting from emotional or physical or memory processes that occurs internally. Other impacts include behavioral. So this could be many different things, from externalizing or violent behaviors to internalizing or self-harming behaviors. Cognition, how we think about things, the types of thoughts that come to us, whether the world seems like a safe place of abundance or if it feels like a scary place. And finally, self-concept. Complex trauma can impact one's ability to know oneself, to understand oneself, and to have a sense of identity. So basically, it's a double reality: chronic repetitive exposure to traumatic interpersonal events, usually with caregiving figures, and then multiple severe and complex impacts as a result. So what is a trauma-informed approach? When we realize that the children in our lives, or the children that we're working with, or the children that we love, have this double reality, we really want to do the best we can to respond to them and to relate to them in a way that's sensitive to this reality, because clearly their responses and their reactions can be easily driven by the effects of the traumatic experience that they've lived. So we want to take a trauma-informed approach. What does that mean? Trauma-informed care is a strength-based framework that is grounded in an understanding of and responsiveness to the impact of trauma, that emphasizes physical, psychological, and emotional safety for both providers and survivors, and that creates opportunities for survivors to rebuild a sense of control and empowerment. So the great news is that the harms done by complex trauma can be healed to greater and lesser degrees, but can be healed. The brain, as we learn more and more, is a plastic thing that can be shaped differently over time and through new experiences. Trauma-informed care represents a new lens to saying, wait a minute, if we look at people just from you must be responsible for your behavior perspective, we're missing, well, hold on a second. Can they effectively be responsible for their behavior if they don't have access to the full range of capacities that we would expect them to have at their age, for example? And so what we want to try to do is help support those capacities so that they are able to take as much control of their own selves, their own decisions, their own behaviors as possible. And it's changing our perspective from what's wrong with you to what happened to you. And when we understand what happened, we can get a better sense of what the impacts might have been. And when we have a better sense of what the impacts might have been, then we have a better sense of how to tailor our approach to be able to speak the language of the child or youth. And we want to be asking, how can we soothe and bring a sense of security, trust, and peace, and create safe harbors for people who have been out on rough seas already? If we look at learning science, we understand that the human brain does not learn new information. We don't acquire new information when we are stressed. When we are stressed and we are in survival mode, we are fully focused on, how do I get out of this? Whether it's beat my way out of it, or freeze until it goes away, or whatever it may be, but we aren't learning. So if we want children, youth, or adults who've experienced complex trauma to be able to learn new or better ways of dealing with things, then we have to first have them in a sense of safety and calm. There's a great book called Treating Traumatic Stress in Children and Adolescents that I strongly recommend. We've been using it for our program implementations. And what's really great about this book is there's a lot of very concrete strategies. So I know sometimes with a webinar like this, okay, well, this is, great ideas, but how do we put those into practice? And so this book is a great resource for that. So this describes the ARC model. And the ARC model is focused on three particular pillars: attachment, like we've already talked about, emotion regulation, and competency. So how can I feel secure in relationships? How can I feel like I'm able to manage myself? And how can I feel a positive sense of self? ARC is a structured method that attacks these various parts of the foundation through a structured and sequential means. So if you see on this little house, we start with engagement, education, routines, and rhythms. So already we're impacting the well-being of children and youth simply by having a predictable environment with routines and rhythms that engage them at their developmental level. Next, we look at caregiver affect management. So how do I self-regulate around the child, and how do I co-regulate with the child? How do I attune with them? And how do I choose an effective response even in challenging situations? And so all this base part of the model, we're not even doing anything with the children or youth yet directly. Once we get into regulation, once the children and youth are in a situation where they're able to regulate, we help them to identify their emotions and then to modulate them. And then at a later stage of development, we can start looking at executive functionings, which is brain functioning, self-development and identity, and relational connection. And the ultimate goal of all of this is trauma experience integration. Those of us who've experienced complex trauma will never have a life without it. It's part of our backpack. But that's not necessarily a horrible thing. It is something that we carry and something we can learn from and something that can provide us with insights and wisdom, but it's something we also need to manage. So we start with engagement, education, routines, and rhythms as the absolute foundation. Ask questions like, who carries this child in their heart and who believes in this child? Who does this child trust? What is their life story? How does it affect their functioning, their abilities, their internal world? And what are their needs? These reflections need to include the perspectives of each of the actors involved, including the children, adolescents, caregivers, stakeholders, or systems. Routines and rhythms guide all aspects of care and lay the foundation on which everything else can be achieved, and they are extremely powerful. So this includes plan for everyone, adjusting to the needs of the child, recognizing their particularities, connecting with their abilities, and accepting this is not a continuous path. So if I think about some of the rehabilitation centers, centre de réadaptation here in Quebec, we call them, but these would be institutional group homes. One of the most powerful interventions that we do in these sites is to put in a routine and a rhythm that happens daily and then personalize it for each youth. So some of the youth, when they get home from school, they need 10 minutes just to chill in their room, to maybe wash their hands, maybe read a book. Other ones want time to read, listen to music. Other kids want to go and play a game together. And so we take the time to figure out for each what that looks like, and then how to make that something predictable that they can look forward to and count on. But of course, being flexible enough so that we can try something new and tailored to each environment. So for your family, you might do routines and rhythms completely different than another family would do them. There's no perfect way. It really has to be something that fits for you and makes sense for you. Of course, there's a question of dosage or balance between routines imposed by parents and those negotiated and discussed with children. And rituals, what makes this family unique? What experiences anchor time and mark values and express love? And what traces are left behind by these rituals? So for some families, these are religious rituals. They could be attending services or attending synagogue. For other families, these could be the rites of spring or watching the phases of the moon, or it really depends on your personal beliefs and what makes sense and defines who you are. But we want to think about key moments with children and youth because transitions are often where you'll see a lot of the symptomatic behaviors of complex trauma arising. These are tough often for kids without complex trauma, right? So what we try to do for kids who are able is to give them a visual sense of what's going to happen so they know what their routine is going to be, so they know positively what the expectations are, and so it's not critical. And this can help guide them to have a little bit more of a sense of competency. What we want to avoid is individualizing negative, judgmental, stereotypical stuff. Good people do this, bad people do that. You're good today, Justin, you're being a bad boy today. This kind of stuff, not very helpful. There are a million ways to be successful. There are a million ways to have issues. So we don't want to focus on the problems. We really want to just be aiming for, all right, it's time to do this. How do you want me to help you, or you want to do it by yourself? Or would you like me to come with you? Or would you, if it's a younger child, a lot of talking through stuffed animals or tutus can be very helpful here. What we also want to avoid is insincere positivity, directing thoughts or feelings. It's great to personalize things and try to make it fun for kids, but just to be careful, especially if you're working with a child who really is struggling with a great deal of dysregulation, that these things can be overwhelming and also give a sense that they're not measuring up. When we get into caregiver affect management, attunement, and effective response, we're thinking about how caring for many different children, all with the same presentation, different presentations, needs, and challenges, is an art. I know that many of you have more than one child, and so I will just bow to you because it is not easy, and that is for sure. And complexity is increased by the lack of predictability during moments of crisis. So planning ahead is always a good idea. It's inevitable that responsible adults will experience a range of thoughts, feelings, and reactions, and this journey comes with many high points and low. It just takes more than love and a big heart. There will be times that we are tested by our children. There will be times that we'll lose our patience. There will be times that we will raise our voice or react in ways that we never thought we would or that we didn't want to. That's when we want to look at our caregiver affect management and say, how am I managing my feelings? How am I regulating? What do I need? So a reflection to help guide us to that is to ask, I feel competent as a parent when what is going on? So to think about positive examples in the same way that we would want to with children and youth, what's working? And then how do we make that happen as often as possible and make it achievable? By addressing the needs of the child, even if we want them to be further ahead, what you may notice with children who've experienced complex trauma is that developmentally, they may not be at the expected benchmark for their age. That's completely to be expected, actually, and that's okay. And so we want to nourish that level of development. There's nothing wrong with doing that because that will help them overcome and move to the next level. So I know sometimes parents are afraid of infantilizing children or doing it for them too much because then they're not going to learn for themselves. And that's where we need to balance and ask, is this because of a developmental deficit related to complex trauma, in which case support them as much as you can. By acknowledging milestones and achievements, we can really also instill that sense of competency in children, youth, and ourselves, and stopping the spiraling and the catastrophizing thoughts. Oh, I'm so stupid. I should, no place for any of that. We all make mistakes. We all have a hard time sometimes, and that's okay. And we get up and we try again. In family and personal contexts, I want to really underline the importance of caring for yourself. Well-being activities. What do you have in place for yourself? What kinds of support do you have? Do you have therapy? Do you have a best friend you have coffee with once a week? Do you have a group of men that you walk with or play golf with or whatever your activities are? Please give yourselves times to recharge and to nourish yourselves as much as possible. Attunement and effective response is about interpreting the needs behind behaviors. So when something goes really wrong, how can we be curious and be a detective and say, okay, that's not what I expected. I wonder what that's about. And it's okay to be uncertain and to question as long as we're gentle and respectful. What could the behavior be trying to achieve? What is the need that it tries to meet? What are the triggers that cause a fearful reaction? What prevents or causes this child to return to a state of emotional regulation? Back up and just think about the patterns you're seeing. Oftentimes in care, we're seeing children and youth that will be triggered by something really unexpected: milk, the smell of coffee, ice in a glass. These things can trigger intense re-experiencing of trauma. But without being a detective and sort of sitting back and saying, when did this happen last time? What was going on? It might be difficult to figure out what it's about. Behavior is communication. And when there's an unexpected behavior, it's trying to tell us something. So if we can get rid of all of our pressure to control the situation and have the right thing happen and have children behave the way they're supposed to, if we're feeling that kind of pressure, and just listen to the behavior, as long as everybody's physically safe, what's the same? Is this a biological reaction, an emotional reaction? Is this related to thoughts? Be a detective to try to figure out what it's about. It could be many things, and it will be something different for each one of your children. And then how do we reframe the behavior from kids do well if they can, not kids won't do well or kids will misbehave? If we have a situation where a child has had a difficult experience and the response is punitive, scary, irregular, then they'll develop thoughts to go with that. They'll develop a worldview and they'll develop behaviors that go with it. So how can we back it up again and say, okay, what's this about? And then how do we reframe it in a way that we can get to the outcome that we're looking for? The principles of effective response are realistic expectations above all. And this is probably one of the biggest messages that I constantly hear myself repeating. If you set the bar here, but the capacities are here, even if the desire is to be here, the capacities are not there, and you will be frustrated and disappointed. Your child will feel like they're failing. You'll feel like you're failing, and it's a recipe for a whole lot of disappointment. So how to have a realistic expectation? If you're dealing with a child who has had an outburst at every single meal, then maybe the realistic expectation is one meal in a week with no outburst. Really bring it down. A significant discrepancy between the chronological age of the young person and the developmental age associated with capacities or behaviors is inevitable, like I said. Identify which behaviors to improve and which to stop. Support positive behaviors and give clear positive behavioral expectations. Remember that behavior is more likely to be stopped if the underlying need is met and emotion regulation is sustained. They don't get into a state of panic. Aim for fairness, not equity. Individualize things. So if there's a child who has a really hard time at mealtime and they like to be off to the side with a TV tray, and that makes them feel good, that's okay. That's okay. Choose your battles. What we try to say is have one or two goals at a time, one or two realistic goals, and let the rest of it go. You'll tackle it tomorrow once the one or two you have now get resolved. So if they're constantly making irritating mouth noises, I had a child who liked to play the recorder as loud as possible when angry. Sounds horrible. Is that what you want to focus on right now, or is there something more important? Find alternatives as much as you can to isolation or timeouts. So this could be a cozy chair. This could be a special corner with a special stuffed animal, or this could be an activity that is particularly calming. And beware of inconsistency. Anything that's given as a recompense, a privilege, a reward should not be removed as a punishment. If they earn the reward, they get to keep that. Punishment can be something different if there has to be one. And let go of unhelpful fears such as, will we spoil him? She'll manipulate us. I'll lose my authority.
Okay, everyone, I think Michelle is just frozen, so we're just going to give her a second to come back. So just bear with
Well,
her.
that would be
Sorry, Denise, you're frozen for a little bit. So
oh, am I
yeah, it
back?
was just around like the unhelpful fears about about losing, I will lose my authority, and then after
Oh
that,
yeah,
I lost you.
sorry about that, everybody.
Hi, that's
Um,
right.
so yeah, just to say we don't want authority. We don't want to be, you know, in that kind of a power dynamic as much as we want trust and respect, which is a two-way street. Determine what is an untouchable. So for example, my son, when he was little, had a stuffed animal, or we call it a tutu, this little dog named Edmonton. That would have been an untouchable. No matter what happens, no matter how bad it is, nobody touches Edmonton. So children need to have a few things that stay in their authority no matter what, that are calming and soothing for them, and give praise to every child. Um, some children are like a flower in the pot, and they're gorgeous, and you see it all the time, and you can't help but comment on, oh, look at this, look at that. And some children are a seed in the dirt, and they're a beautiful seed, but we can't see them yet. But we still have to give them attention and love and care and find a way to praise them. How to create a secure base. So we also work with something called the secure base model, which is a way of understanding how do we construct a secure base for children. And as you can see, it has some ideas around availability, sensitivity, acceptance, cooperation, and family membership. So I'll go through these a bit. If we think about availability, a child's ability to trust, and trust is key, depends on the child's early attachment experiences and on the adult's ability to be physically and emotionally available. As I'm sure you all know, children are much more nonverbal creatures than they are verbal creatures. We can tell them things, but they're more likely to learn from what we actually do. Examples of strength in this dimension include physical and emotional availability, capacity to reflect on how to support and build trust, and alert to a child's needs and signals. So again, back to being a detective. Start, if you haven't already, which you probably already have, cataloging in your mind, what are the tells when my child's about to lose it, or when they're about to withdraw? What are those things that are telling me there's a need, they're signaling me with their nonverbals? Examples of difficulty here include lack of time or energy, feeling marginalized by the child, or not believing children should need that much attention. Children need a boatload of attention, especially children who've had complex trauma experiences. That's not to say we need to smother them, but it's to say that we need to be keeping them in mind, and we need to be kind of tethered with them and in nonverbal communication pretty much all of the time. How are they doing? Where are they? What, have I got any signals coming? Nope, we're good. Okay, all right. Sensitivity. Children need the capacity to express and manage the full range of feelings appropriately in relationships. Through sensitivity, caregivers can identify how children manage strong feelings. Examples of strengths in this dimension include thinking and talking about the child's feelings, recognizing and validating them, standing in the shoes of the child, our own self-regulation and appropriate sharing about feelings. And examples of difficulties include a lack of curiosity about the child's mind, emotionally dysregulated interactions, a denial of the child's past, such as a fresh start, we're not going to talk about that or think about that, or rigid thinking and blaming. I wanted to share with you a short video showing me, through the eyes of my son, showing low sensitivity, because it's such a great example of what this looks like in reality. So I'm just going to share my screen with you and play you a short video. Okay, here we go. Okay, so if you look at the look on Ben's face here, you can see he's kind of furrowing his brow. He's not too impressed. And what happened was he was in the front of the house and he was coloring on the sidewalk. And I interrupted him because I wanted to see if he'd like to call Nana. And I had a bunch of questions for him. And I would like you to notice when I become sensitive, the way his nonverbals change.
And Nana, what are you drawing, Minnie? An octopus with a mustache.
Okay, so this is a super example of a lack of sensitivity followed by, oh, shoot, I got it. This is my agenda, calling Nana. And then I show interest in him and what he's thinking about and what's he doing. And it's like this, the change that we see. And next we're looking at acceptance. So many children have difficulty accepting and valuing themselves. The exact nature of this difficulty for each child needs careful attention. Accepting the self is linked to a developing self-concept and identity, which can be interrupted or harmed through complex trauma experiences. And examples of strengths here are showing joy and pride and pleasure in the child, giving them easy praise, kindly supporting them in dealing with setbacks, and encouraging them to lead with their interests and activities. Examples of difficulties would be focusing on negative aspects of the child or seeing the child as a burden, not celebrating their individuality, not encouraging them to lead in things that they're interested in. Cooperation. An assertive child also willing to compromise and cooperate is more likely to reach goals and maintain relationships. So we want to help children to have the capacity to put themselves forward. To do that, they need to trust. Their ability to cooperate and work with adults may be linked to their feelings of being effective and being able and being capable. Examples of strength in this dimension include thinking about the child as autonomous and with valid wishes, feelings, and goals, asking them what they prefer, for example, looking for ways to cooperate with the child, appropriate negotiating, promoting choice making and effectiveness. Oh, would you like to pick out your outfit for school tomorrow tonight and we'll lay it out for tomorrow? Setting safe and clear boundaries. And examples of difficulties include the caregiver emphasizing their own need for control, not celebrating the child's need for autonomy to promote competence and effectiveness, and finding it difficult to allow the child to take moderate risks. One of the examples of this that I've just found unbelievable was in one of the institutions where in a particular region, children and youth with the highest care needs, so the most dysregulated behavior, were placed, and it was the end of the line placement when they could not be supported in foster homes anymore. And there was this young child, and their favorite thing to do was to take the garbage out. And so we looked at that, and well, what do you know? When they took the garbage out at the end of dinner, whatever child did that task would get to walk alone with one of the workers, and they would put on their boots and coat and they would go outside, and they had a good 5-minute walk to the garbage and a 5-minute walk back. And this was one of the most coveted tasks in that environment. So here we had an example of children being able to feel like I can do this, and also having a privileged moment with the adult. Family membership is a source of support for children to become happy, settled, secure, resilient, and pro-social members of the community into adulthood. The child's needs to develop a coherent sense of identity is certainly linked to family membership. So helping them make sense of who they are in relationship to their families. Examples of strength in this dimension would include talking about and thinking about the child's inclusion in their family, and this can include the biological family as well as the adoptive or fostering family, and talking openly and appropriately about their family's strengths and difficulties. Examples of difficulty could be treating the child differently to others in the family, talking and thinking negatively about their family, not understanding that families express mutual belonging in different ways. So there's a few resources here that I'm also going to give to everyone, and I will link everything here. I'll put the presentation into the chat for you so that you have a copy. And thank you so much for your attention. I'd love to take some time and answer any questions that might have come through in the chat, or have further discussion on any of the elements that people are interested in.
Thanks so much, Denise. So much great information in there. We'll let that simmer and see if anybody wants to bring up anything that you talked about. Is there anything that you have a question about what Denise presented? She's available to take your questions live. I really like, I'm just going to highlight a couple moments for me that were, I mean, all of it was really good. Really the expectations piece, like about like, you know, like just because you want this to be here, and even the child might want this to be here, but to be realistic about those expectations. I think that's a really good reminder for all people.
It's hard. And I think we judge ourselves also, right, by through our children, and we look at how they're behaving. And if it's not to what maybe others think it should be or what we think it should be, then that can not only be our disappointment in them, but it can be our reflection on ourselves to say, I'm not a good enough dad, or I'm not a good enough mom. And in reality, you're just dealing with a challenge, and this is the challenge right now, and it's okay. It's okay. And you're going to get through it like you got through a lot of other things.
Yeah. And I think sometimes there's a lot of like chatter, like in our own minds about, oh, well, what is so-and-so going to think? Or chatter that maybe like our parents might, or, you know, and so, you know, you're trying to accommodate everybody's expectations, but at this, you know, I think that's the distraction. I do have a question. Somebody has about, there was a certain bullet point in the presentation that said, accept, like in quotes, accepting that it is not a continuous path. So this person wants to know, should I assume that it meant growth and development can take one step forward and two steps back, meaning like it's not
sure,
linear, right?
Absolutely. And this is the thing about the impacts of complex trauma, is these things are interdependent, right? How our biology impacts our behavior, impacts our cognition, impacts all these things are connected. So we don't really have the ability to fix component A and then move to component B and then accomplish that and move to component C, because all of these things are enmeshed together. And so when a child can make a massive leap in one area, that can leave bare a new area that they hadn't considered before, or that you hadn't considered before, or that wasn't in the forefront before. So it's nonlinear in a very complex way. And so I guess that would be another piece of encouragement that I'd really want to underline for people. If you feel like you made progress somewhere and then it all just fell to heck in a handbasket, that might be a sign of development. Okay. Unusual, but that might be a sign that, yeah, you accomplished something. You got over that speed bump, and by getting over it, you were able to come to the next one.
I hope that answers your question. Someone else wants to know so Denise is very nicely going to put her entire presentation into a PDF, and then she's going to post it later on in the chat. So you can.
I'm just trying to do that, Chantel. I might email it to you because I don't seem to be able to put it in the chat. So I'll just send it to you via email right now, and you can go ahead and put it in the chat.
I will do that. So yes, it will be available to you in the chat, and you can have all those lots of great infographics in there too, like visuals. The other analogy that I love that I'd never heard before was the flower. So, you know, when you can see something, it's easy to, you know, give it the praise and the compliment, but just because the seed is in the earth, it doesn't make it any less beautiful and less worthy of praise. I love that analogy.
One of the tricks that we often think about is to, in the back of our minds, say, okay, we've got 3 kids in the house, and by the end of today, I want to make sure I give 2 positive pieces of praise to each one. Could happen at a different time. It'll be about different things. But by the time they lay their heads on the pillows tonight, they've heard 2 good things about themselves. And even if it's, hey, I'm really proud of you for brushing your teeth, or I really like those pants you chose this morning. Whatever, it really is just about reflecting something so that child can have a moment of,
That's great. And then I think because we're also, oh, there's your PDF. There, we're just all so busy. Life is hectic. So I think that is a really simple way to say, remind, two things. It's almost like an exercise in mindfulness too, because you need to stop and kind of reflect on the day. I think that's a great, I'm learning, I'm getting lots of good.
Well, I will admit that I always feel really sheepish because it's clear to me how hard it is to be a parent. And I am a parent, and it's really challenging to parent a child who's experienced complex trauma. And for some of you, you have children who had traumatic experiences. Great examples would be surgeries before the age of 4, things that we might not even necessarily think were traumatic. And when they happen before a child is verbal, they don't have the capacity to verbalize it, but they have the physical memory of it. And so you can be dealing with a lot of behaviors and a lot of reactions that can, at the outset, be super confusing, especially when there's been nonverbal trauma. And when I say trauma, that includes what we used to call neglect, but children just simply not having their developmental needs met. So I guess one of the things that to not feel so guilty about giving you another list of things to do as parents who are already dealing with some pretty long lists is just to be very reassuring and very respectful that good enough parenting is actually great parenting, and that these things are tough, and no webinar is going to make the crises go away or make the tantrums go away or make the development that has to be caught up easy. But I do want to leave you with a sense of, okay, this is expected. Mm-hmm. This isn't because I'm a crap parent. This isn't because my kid's damaged beyond repair. This is just the expected challenges that come, that I can just keep arming myself with as much info, trying to keep myself as well as possible onward and upward.
Thank you for saying that. We do have another question about whether you could offer suggestions, ideas, or strategies for helping children transitioning back from visits with their biological families, first families. We do have this conversation a lot in our community, because that is when a lot of times we see symptoms of that behavior. Like after they come back from a visit, there'll be a lot of big behaviors.
I think that you've probably, I would love it if people would put in the chat strategies that they've found that work, because I bet you with all the people in the room right now, you've all developed some incredible strategies, which if you were willing to just anonymously share in the chat, I would certainly welcome that. That is a really unsurprising time to have that kind of a flare up. And so I think the first thing I would say is to expect it, and to expect it for a long, long time, and to expect it may go away sometimes and it'll come back. I think to plan the routine and the ritual around the child's needs for the going and the coming back. So as much as possible to keep it as predictable as possible. I know sometimes those visits times can get changed and the plans can get rearranged. So to avoid that as much as you can, in as much power as you have to do so, but then to have a routine that you have control over once the child returns. And so to work out with them, if you can, as much as possible, but from using your own wisdom and knowing them, what are the things that they find the most soothing in general when they have a rough time? And so if that's about a particular movie coming on the TV, if that's about a particular kind of muffin and a stuffed animal waiting in the car seat for them, or whatever it might be, that to try to have something repetitive that's pleasant and calming for them that happens every single time.
Yeah, good suggested. And you're right. Somebody just commented, how do people post info anonymously? And you're right, because unfortunately, because we're on Facebook Live, there is no option to add something anonymously. So if you are a part of the Adopt for Life community in the Parent to Parent Support Network, there is a support group called Strengthening Open Adoption. So if you ask to join that group, if you're not a member of it already, there'll be, it's a closed private group where people can offer strategies and what's worked, and you kind of, help each other along that journey. This worked for me, this didn't work for me, or it changes every time. Sometimes there's no pattern and sometimes there is. So I think it's just, as you said, Denise, it's just something that you have to expect for a long time. And rely on your peers. Like what Adopt for Life offers is that peer-to-peer support. So reach out to other adoptive parents or families or caregivers and see and ask for suggestions. Yeah. Another, just saying thank you for your presentation.
A pleasure.
A lot of great information. I agree. Another piece I want to touch on as we're just closing out the hour is, you mentioned it briefly in your presentation as well about self-care and about parents and caregivers finding, even if it's just an iota of time or some type of routine that's just for them. It's another topic that comes up a lot in our communities is burnout, just feeling burned out.
Parenting is exhausting. It's exhausting. So I don't have a magic wand for this, but I do want to be someone who's been studying this and looking at this and caring about this for a long time, just to affirm and validate for the community that your exhaustion is legitimate. It is tiring. And if you're working with children who are throwing you curveballs in their behavior, and you have to think 3 times as fast to stay just ahead so that you can catch those balls, it's very tiring. I think, again, this is one of those things where your community support could probably come up with some incredible and ingenious strategies. But I just want to tell you, please respect those needs and never for 1 second say I'm being selfish or that you're not loving your child or that you're not doing enough. Because when we think about the self-regulation and the capacity to keep the child in your mind, if you are strung out and burnt out and stressed, you can't do that effectively. Nobody can, right? This is like trying to learn when you're stressed. Our brains don't work that way. The gray matter shuts down when we're stressed. And so all those really complex communicative processes that happen non-verbally, intersubjectively, those things stop when we're super, super stressed. So as much as you can, take those moments for yourself, however you can in your personal situations. And if you do, take advantage of it and respect those needs that you have, because those needs being met are nourishing your children.
Yes. And, like you said too in your presentation, that a lot of their learning is nonverbal. So they're learning through our actions. So if, we're not taking care of ourselves, we're just, inadvertently teaching that too. So we have a couple minutes, not a couple minutes, we still have a few minutes. So if you have a question for Denise, she's happy to take your question live. I will be posting the PDF of the presentation shortly. So you'll be able to review that, at your own pace. I know a lot of material was covered tonight, so it'll be nice for you to have that information and be able to reflect on it. Just more people saying thank you.
My pleasure.
Presentation. So a lot of people just thanking you for your time, and I know it's very much appreciated. So I think we'll leave it at that for tonight. If you do have questions about this webinar tonight, you can still put them in the chat. This presentation will be available to watch on replay. So maybe you tuned in a little bit late and you didn't catch the beginning, not a problem. You can watch it on demand when you have some time, because I know it's hard to carve out a full hour sometimes, right? So this way it's great. They can watch on demand. You can have the PDF, and go at your own pace. So a big thank you for everyone who did tune in, or maybe who's tuning in on replay. Thanks so much for taking the time to watch. And thank you to Denise for giving up your Tuesday night to be with us.
My pleasure.
It was a pleasure having you, and look forward to hopefully hearing from you again soon.
Fantastic. Thanks for all your important work.
All right. Well, good night, everyone. Thank you again, and take care of yourselves. Bye for now.